You know what's interesting? Everyone talks about marriage vows saying, for better or worse, but nobody actually explains what that means until you're sitting there watching your husband claim he's having some kind of health emergency, and you're just trying to finish a newsletter about sustainable fashion. I'm Rachel. I'm 35, and I've been married to Steven for 9 years. We have a pretty comfortable life. He works in software development, earns decent money, and I run a lifestyle newsletter from home focused on eco-friendly living and sustainable fashion. Nothing extraordinary, but it brings in some income and keeps me occupied while he's working those insane hours at the office. So there I was last Tuesday afternoon, sitting at our dining table with my laptop, working on this piece about ethical clothing brands, when Steven comes dragging through the front door around 3:30, which literally never happens. This man practically lives at his company, usually gets home after 9 p.m. most nights, and here he is disrupting my afternoon workflow. "You're home early," I said, barely glancing up from my screen because I was totally in the zone. You know? I had this perfect momentum going about sustainable textile production and supply chain transparency. He dropped into the chair across from me, looking all theatrical and pale. I nearly passed out at the office, had to leave. I looked up for maybe 3 seconds. He appeared exhausted, but Steven always looks exhausted. The guy works himself into the ground. 18-hour days surviving on energy drinks and takeout food. I've mentioned 1,000 times that his schedule is unsustainable, but does he listen? Never. "Did you eat anything today?" I asked, returning to my laptop. I was trying to complete this newsletter before my yoga class later. "I haven't had a real meal in probably a week. I've been functioning on caffeine and anxiety." "Well, there's leftover Thai food in the refrigerator." Look, I understand that sounds harsh, but what was I supposed to do? Abandon everything and prepare him an elaborate meal? He's an adult. If he's not eating correctly, that's his decision. I'm not his mother. He just sat there staring at me like he was waiting for some dramatic response. I think something's seriously wrong with me. You overwork yourself. I've mentioned this before. I continued typing because I had a deadline for this newsletter and my subscribers expect regular content. I work to support our lifestyle, to pay for this house, your vehicle, everything we have. Nobody forced you to work yourself to exhaustion. The way he looked at me then, like I'd hit him or something. But what did he expect? I've been warning him for years to establish better boundaries between work and life. Now he wants compassion because he finally burned out? I need to go to the emergency clinic. Something's definitely wrong. So go. You don't need my approval. I waited for him to stand up and leave, but he just kept sitting, there watching me with this strange expression. Finally, he said, "You're not going to come with me." This is where I might have been somewhat harsh, but I was getting irritated. I had commitments that evening, and he was being all dependent and dramatic about what was probably just exhaustion from his own poor lifestyle choices. "I'm not your caregiver. You're an adult. Handle yourself." The look on his face completely transformed, like he'd never heard me say anything like that before, which is absurd because I've always been self-sufficient. I've never been the kind of wife who hovers and makes a fuss over every minor issue. "I've been handling myself," he said, standing up slowly. "What I thought I had was a partner." "Don't be theatrical. Go see a doctor if you're that concerned." He left after that, and I completed my newsletter in peace. I even had time to prepare myself a nice salad and watch some documentary before yoga class. When he returned that evening, I was in the kitchen making myself a late smoothie. "How did it go?" I asked, not turning around from the blender. "Blood pressure dangerously high. Doctor says I need to make drastic lifestyle changes or I'm at serious risk for a stroke." "Well, maybe now you'll listen when I tell you to work less." He went silent after that. I assumed he was just processing everything, recognizing I'd been correct about his work habits all along. The following weeks were strange. Steven started doing all these health-oriented things, joining some premium fitness center, preparing meals in advance, getting to sleep earlier, which was acceptable, I suppose. But he became sort of obsessive about it, constantly discussing his training sessions, his nutrition plans, his progress with some wellness coach. "That's expensive," I told him when he mentioned the fitness center membership costs. "Not as expensive as a stroke. Just don't become fanatical. You always get obsessed with things." But he kept going 4 times a week like clockwork. He'd arrive home all energized and positive, talking about his coach Marcus and how much better he was feeling. It was pleasant to see him less stressed, but I started feeling like I was living with an entirely different person. The changes were unmistakable. He dropped weight, gained energy, seemed more self-assured. But he also became withdrawn. Not hostile or anything, just less accessible. When I wanted to share drama from my yoga studio friends, he'd listen politely, but not really participate like he used to. When I had issues with my newsletter or needed him to repair something in the house, he'd assist, but without that eager-to-help attitude he'd always displayed. "You're never around anymore," I said one evening as he was packing his gym bag. "I'm taking care of myself like you recommended." "I didn't mean you should become fanatical about it." "I'm not fanatical. I'm dedicated. There's a distinction." He started preparing these complex, healthy meals, but only portions for himself. When I asked if he was going to make extra for me, he'd just shrug and say I could prepare whatever I wanted, which was reasonable, I guess, but it felt odd after years of him always considering both of us. The most frustrating part was how he stopped being my emotional support. For 9 years, Stephen had been my outlet for everything. Work frustrations, friend conflicts, family problems. Suddenly, he'd listen with this courteous but detached expression like he was tolerating me. When I'd finish venting, he'd just nod and return to whatever he was doing. "You seem different lately," I told him one night after he barely reacted to my story about Jennifer being completely insufferable at yoga. "Different how?" "Distant, like you don't care about anything happening here." "You told me I wasn't your responsibility. I'm just reciprocating." "That's not what I meant. You know I didn't mean it like that. When I nearly collapsed from overwork, you made it extremely clear that my well-being wasn't your concern. I'm just following your example." "That's not fair. I was just stressed that day." He almost laughed. "Fair? You want to discuss fair?" Fair would have been having a wife who cared when her husband almost had a medical crisis. Fair would have been having someone encourage my efforts to get healthy instead of dismissing them. Fair would have been having a partner instead of a roommate who treats me like an inconvenience. I stared at him. Where was this coming from? "This is coming from me, finally accepting what you've been demonstrating for months. You don't want to be my caregiver? Fine. I found people who actually care about my well-being." "What do you mean you found people?" "I mean I have individuals in my life now who are genuinely invested in my health and happiness. People who notice when I'm making progress and celebrate with me. People who ask how I'm doing and actually listen to the response." My stomach dropped. "Are you talking about that coach?" "I'm talking about anyone who treats me like I matter, which apparently doesn't include my wife." I stood up then, finally putting down my phone and giving him my complete attention. "You're being ridiculous. Of course you matter to me." "Really? Name one thing I've accomplished in the past 3 months." Silence. I couldn't think of anything specific. "Tell me one goal I've achieved or one positive change I've made." More silence. I knew he'd been doing fitness stuff, but I hadn't really paid attention to the specifics. "Here's an easier one. What did I have for breakfast this morning?" I opened my mouth and then closed it. I had absolutely no idea. "I've lost 28 pounds, brought my blood pressure to normal levels, and completely transformed my relationship with stress and health. I've been working with a wellness coach who's helped me rebuild my fitness from scratch. I've been meal prepping, exercising 6 days a week, and sleeping better than I have in a decade." Each fact struck me like a blow. I'd been so absorbed in my own routine that his entire transformation had occurred without me noticing. "And through all of this, you've shown about as much interest as you would in a stranger's fitness journey. Actually, less. Most strangers would at least say congratulations." I didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you don't pay attention. You don't ask questions. You don't care about anything that doesn't directly impact you." "That's not true." "When's the last time you asked me how I was feeling? Not how was work or how was the gym. When did you last ask how I was actually doing?" I couldn't answer because we both knew it had been months, maybe longer. "The wellness coach I work with asks me that question every single session. She remembers what I tell her about my stress levels, my sleep quality, my energy. She celebrates when I reach a new milestone and supports me when I'm struggling. She knows more about my daily life after 3 months than you've bothered to learn in 3 years. Are you having an affair?" "I'm having conversations." Real conversations with someone who actually cares about my answers. Something I haven't had at home in so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like. I care. No, you don't. You care about your newsletter, your yoga classes, your sustainability projects, your social media. You care about having someone around to pay the bills and listen to your complaints. But you don't care about me as a person. The truth of it hung in the air between us. I tried to argue, to defend myself, but we both knew he was right. I had checked out of our marriage so completely that I hadn't even noticed when he stopped trying to check back in. I can change, I said finally. Why would you want to? You've made it clear that caring about my well-being isn't something you're interested in doing. I was wrong. I see that now. You see it now because you've lost my attention. Not because you actually care about my well-being. You're upset because I'm not focused on you anymore, not because you want to focus on me. I started to protest, but he held up his hand. I spent 9 years trying to be enough for someone who couldn't be bothered to notice when I was falling apart. I'm done with that. I'm done begging for scraps of care from someone who treats my health, my goals, and my feelings like they're optional considerations in her life. So, what are you saying? I'm saying I've learned what it feels like to be around someone who actually cares about my well-being, and I'm never going back to settling for less than that. He walked upstairs, leaving me standing in the living room with 9 years of negligence finally catching up to me. I'd had every opportunity to be the person who supported his journey back to health. Instead, I'd chosen indifference. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in too little, too late. Suddenly, I was interested in everything. I asked about his workouts, complimented his weight loss, even suggested we prepare healthy meals together. I wanted to know about his day, his goals, his feelings. After months of treating him like background noise, I was desperate to become the supportive wife I'd never bothered to be. But I could see in his eyes that he'd already made his decision. He started staying out later after his fitness sessions, coming home with this peaceful, content expression that used to be reserved for me. When I asked where he'd been, he'd mention grabbing coffee or running errands, but something in his tone suggested there was more to it. I tried cooking his favorite meals, but he'd politely eat a small portion and stick to his meal prep containers. I bought books about fitness and health, trying to show interest in his new lifestyle, but he'd just nod and thank me without genuine enthusiasm. The worst part was watching him become this confident, self-assured version of himself that I'd never seen before. He walked differently, talked differently, smiled more, and none of it had anything to do with me. "You seem lighter lately," I said one evening, trying to start a real conversation. More confident. I feel like I'm finally living for myself instead of trying to earn someone's attention. The words stung because they were so obviously about me. "I want to be involved in your health journey," I said, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. "That would be nice if it was genuine, but you're only interested now because you've lost control of the situation. For 9 months, you couldn't be bothered to ask how I was feeling. Now that I found happiness elsewhere, suddenly you want to be supportive. That's not fair. What's not fair is spending 9 years with someone who only notices you exist when you stop paying attention to them." That night, I lay awake thinking about everything he'd said. The scary part was that he wasn't wrong. I had taken him completely for granted, treated his needs as optional, dismissed his health crisis like it was an inconvenience to my schedule. But I also felt angry. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, right? He was supposed to communicate if he was unhappy, not just check out emotionally and start forming connections with other people. The wellness coach thing especially bothered me. What kind of professional relationship requires coffee dates and long conversations about personal problems? 4 days later, he came home with papers. "I filed for divorce." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You can't be serious." I'm completely serious. I spent 4 months learning what it feels like to be around someone who genuinely cares about my well-being. Someone who asks how I'm doing and actually listens to the answer. Someone who celebrates my victories and supports me through challenges. I can do that too. No, you can't. Because caring isn't something you can fake or perform when it's convenient. It's something you feel or you don't. And you've shown me for 9 years that you don't feel it for me. So you're leaving me for your coach. I'm leaving you for myself. The coach just showed me what it feels like to be valued by someone who chooses to care about me every single day. I tried everything: tears, anger, promises to change, threats about what divorce would cost him. But Stephen just sat there with this calm, resolved expression, like he'd already worked through every possible argument in his head. "You can't just throw away 9 years of marriage over a misunderstanding," I said. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is 9 years of you showing me exactly how little I mean to you, and me finally accepting it." The divorce process was brutal, not because it was contentious — Stephen was surprisingly generous with the settlement — but because it forced me to confront the reality of our relationship. When I tried to get friends and family on my side, expecting them to agree that Stephen was being dramatic and unfair, I found less support than expected. "He does seem happier lately," my sister said when I called her crying about the papers. "You've always been pretty focused on your own thing," Jennifer mentioned during yoga. "Maybe this is a chance for both of you to find what you actually want." Even my own mother, who usually takes my side in everything, said, "Marriage requires effort from both people, honey. When's the last time you really put effort into making Stephen happy?" I started stalking his social media and the fitness center's website, trying to figure out what was happening in his life. The center posted client success stories, and there was Stephen looking incredible, talking about his transformation and how his coach had saved his life by believing in his potential. Sophia. Her name was Sophia, and she was beautiful in this natural, athletic way that made me feel ridiculous in comparison. Her social media was full of motivational posts about health and wellness, pictures of her helping clients achieve their goals, testimonials from people whose lives she'd changed. And there, buried in the comments of one of her posts, was Stephen thanking her for everything, calling her an inspiration, saying he couldn't have done it without her support and encouragement. I felt sick reading it. This woman had given Stephen everything I'd refused to provide: genuine care, emotional support, partnership. And now she was taking my husband. 3 years later, I found out through a mutual friend's Instagram post that Stephen and Sophia had gotten married. The photos were stunning: a beach ceremony, both of them glowing with happiness, surrounded by friends who looked genuinely excited for them. Stephen looked incredible, healthy, confident, more attractive than I'd ever seen him. Sophia looked radiant in her elegant dress, and the way they looked at each other made my chest ache. You could see the love and respect between them, the way they supported each other, the authentic partnership I'd never bothered to build with him. The worst part was the comments. Person after person talking about what a perfect couple they were, how they'd never seen Stephen so happy, how Sophia was exactly what he needed. His coworkers, his family, even some of our old mutual friends, everyone celebrating their love story. And there I was, sitting alone in the condo I'd moved into after selling our house, scrolling through pictures of my ex-husband's perfect new life with someone who actually deserved him. My newsletter had lost most of its subscribers. Turns out people don't want lifestyle advice from someone whose own life fell apart because she couldn't be bothered to care about her husband's health crisis. The few readers I had left mostly came for the drama, waiting to see what other poor decisions I'd share. I'd tried dating, but it was hopeless. Every man I met seemed boring compared to Stephen, and I found myself comparing them to the husband I'd thrown away through sheer indifference and selfishness. The yoga studio ladies still included me sometimes, but I could tell they were uncomfortable around me. They'd seen how I treated Stephen, watched me dismiss his needs and take him for granted. Now they were polite but distant, probably afraid I'd do the same thing to them if they got too close. Sitting there looking at Stephen and Sophia's wedding photos, I finally understood what I'd lost. I'd had a man who loved me, who worked himself to exhaustion to provide for our life together, who would have done anything for me. And I'd thrown it all away because I couldn't be bothered to show basic human decency when he needed me most. But even now, even seeing how happy he is with someone who actually values him, I can't help feeling angry about it. He could have tried harder to make our marriage work. He could have communicated better about what he needed. He didn't have to give up so easily and run to the first woman who showed him attention. I mean, sure, maybe I wasn't the most attentive wife. Maybe I should have gone to the emergency clinic with him that day, should have been more interested in his health journey, should have noticed when he was struggling. But marriage is supposed to be about working through problems together, not just bailing when things get tough. The truth is, Stephen got lucky. He found someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time, someone whose job it was to care about his well-being. If I'd met him first, if I'd been the one helping him through his health crisis, maybe things would have been different. But I didn't. And now I'm here, alone, watching from the sidelines as my ex-husband lives his best life with someone who actually appreciates what she has. And yeah, maybe I learned something from all this. Maybe I understand now that actions have consequences, that taking people for granted eventually catches up with you. Doesn't mean I have to like it.